Good afternoon, and welcome to the official launch of the second day of the 13th edition of the Spain Investors Day. I would like to welcome the first Vice President of the Government and Minister for the Economy and Digital Transformation, NADIA CALVIñO. Thank you very much for attending this event one more year. The Vice President will be answering your questions before starting lunch. Please use the papers located on each table to write down your questions in English. A stewardess will be picking them up and giving them to the moderator. After this lunch, we will celebrate the Roundtable Strategic Investment in Spain. You are more than welcome to attend it. Without further delay, I now give the floor to Héctor Flórez, CEO for Deloitte Spain. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, Vice President, authorities, representatives of companies and investment funds, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for Deloitte to support Spain Investors Day, a forum whose main objective is to emphasize the potential of our country as an attractive destination for foreign investment. As you know, we are clearly living in an increasingly fragile and complex world, marked by geopolitical tensions, climate and health issues, and deglobalization trends. In short, a more volatile and less predictable environment. In this context, it seems to me that the world needs a strong and influential Europe, a Europe that can bring balance, stability, and hope. A Europe that commits to responsibly leading the global challenges we are facing worldwide. And to make this happen, we must further strengthen the integration within Europe and additionally reinforce our strategic autonomy in fields like industry, energy, food supply, health, and technology. Spain can make a key contribution to help build the Europe the world needs today. In our country, we have a natural tendency to overemphasize our weaknesses and underestimate our strengths. That's our natural tendency. But actually, what our country can offer is extremely valuable today. We can play an important role in building a stronger industry in our continent, a greater energy independence, and a more powerful technology sector. All of this, of course, on top of being a unique tourist destination because of our quality of life, security, and stability. The world needs Europe, and Europe needs Spain. This is the right time to take on this challenge. We have great companies, excellent talent, and the tools to accelerate the transformation process of the Spanish economy, in particular, the next generation funds. Furthermore, Spain will be holding the presidency of the European Commission in the second half of this year. And this is precisely a field in which the first Vice President and Minister of Economy, NADIA CALVIñO, whom I have the honor to introduce today, has a proven track record that will guarantee, without a doubt, that our presidency will be a success. Ms. CALVIñO, thank you very much for joining us today. It is with great pleasure that I now give you the floor. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this very kind introduction. Muchas gracias por la presentación. Buenos días, buenas tardes. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, one more year, to participate once more in this high-profile event, which brings together many investors, key investors in our country, companies, authorities, and has become, I think, a milestone to kickstart the new year. And this event provides me with a great opportunity to share with you some insights on the economic outlook and our economic policy priorities for 2023. When we met last year, I was listening carefully to you, Hector, and when we met last year, our key concern was how to maintain the strong recovery in the wake of the pandemic and in the aftermath of the height of the pandemic, I would say. This, of course, we thought was going to be the challenge last year, but everything changed in February when the war in Ukraine forced all governments, all companies, all citizens to adjust to a new reality, to act once again decisively to cushion the impact of yet another exogenous shock in Europe. And this, I think, has been clearly the key feature of the global economy in 2022 and continues to be the main driver as we start 2023. In this complex international context, the Spanish economy is showing an outstanding strength and resilience. In fact, all forecasts point at a growth rate in 2022 above 5%. And this is after a growth rate, GDP growth rate in 2021 of 5.5%. All estimates expect growth to moderate in 2023, but they all expect also that Spain will outperform our peers. In other words, in a context of maximum uncertainty in the international arena due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the rest of the geopolitical and economic challenges that we're facing, energy crisis, inflation, the tightening of financial conditions as a response to inflation. In this complex context, the Spanish economy continues on a path of strong and sustained growth, thanks to the excellent performance of the labor market, the dynamic development of the external sector, booming investment, and of course, it has already been mentioned right now, the structural changes, the ongoing structural changes which are driven and funded by the Next Generation EU program. Let me briefly comment on the extraordinary performance of the labor market, because social security enrollment is at an all-time record. The positive trend continues. There are more than 20.5 million citizens employed, and this is the highest figure since the great financial crisis that started in 2008. The unemployment rate and youth unemployment are also at historical minima. Moreover, the stability and quality of employment is improving. In the last year, more than 2 million stable, open-ended contracts have been signed in Spain. And this has led to a rapid, fast convergence of the temporary employment rate in Spain towards the EU average. And this shows the positive impact of the labor market reform that was adopted at the end of 2021, started to have an impact at the beginning of 2022, and has a very significant impact, as I was saying, that goes beyond employment levels. Actually, the labor market reform and all the other reforms that are taking place in Spain is having a profound effect on economic stability, because the good performance of the labor market is smoothening cyclical fluctuations. It increases tax and social security revenues, strengthening, therefore, the social security system. It increases human capital and productivity, which, as we all know, are the keys to long-term growth. Not to speak about the social impact. We are talking about young persons finding for the first time stable jobs and therefore being able to start a family, to buy a house. The positive evolution in the labor market is undoubtedly the main factor explaining the improvement of inequality indicators since 2018, even when going through a pandemic and a war. job creation, together with the social protection shield that we have deployed since 2020, and more effective redistributive impact of the fiscal system, these facts, these elements, these changing factors explain the fact that we are starting to correct some of the historical imbalances that have been dragging the Spanish economy since the great financial crisis. I wanted to make this point because I am absolutely persuaded that growth cannot be sustained if it's not sustainable from the social point of view, and therefore correcting social inequalities is one of the targets of our economic policy. Beyond the labour market outstanding performance, a second key factor in the current economic situation is the current account surplus, which has been maintained despite the slowdown of global trade and economic growth, despite the very high energy prices. Of course, everybody knows that Spain has a booming tourist sector, but it's not only that. It's also other services that are showing to be more performant, more competitive than in the past, thus supporting the positive evolution of our external sector. Foreign investment increased by nearly 55% in the first 3 quarters of 2022 compared to the same period last year. And I think that's a clear sign that the business climate in Spain and the certainty and confidence brought about by the recovery plan make Spain one of the most attractive destinations for foreign direct investment. And we shouldn't only talk about the numbers. We all have in mind, I think, remarkable announcements of billionaire investments which have been announced in our country, led by companies such as Google, Vodafone, Maersk, Volkswagen, Cisco, Intel, which I think show the confidence of international investors in our country. Actually, many rankings and surveys are showing record levels of foreign direct investment, particularly in the areas of renewables, car manufacturing, technology, and I insist this cannot be explained without the drive, without the influence of the Spanish recovery plan. In this context, today's main short-term challenge for the whole European economy is probably inflation, which is leading to a rapid rise in interest rates by the European Central Bank, and of course the risk of a slowdown of the economic recovery, particularly in those countries that are most exposed to the war in Ukraine. However, in the case of Spain, thanks, I think, to the slowdown of energy prices at global level, but also to the government's determined response, most recent data are pointing to a very fast moderation of inflation in Spain. Consumer price index year-on-year growth rate fell by 5 percentage points in the last 5 months of 2022, so that Spain is the country with the lowest inflation rate in the EU and the Eurozone. Now, as I have said every year since 2018, every year I participate in the Spain's Investors' Day, our economic policy in this context has basically done 2 things. First, dealing effectively with what's urgent, but without losing sight of what's important, the mid-term roadmap that we are following. In other words, we've put all our efforts in shielding households and firms from the short-term impact of the health and energy crisis, while relentlessly and I think efficiently also pushing forward with our green and digital agendas and pursuing social justice in order to have a sustained and sustainable growth in the mid-run too. Talking about what's urgent, we adopted in 2022 6 legislative packages to respond to the impact of the war, and in particular to contain inflation and ensure a fair distribution of the impact of the war. And this has allowed us to provide a flexible, effective and targeted response to the most vulnerable households and also most affected economic sectors. Together with the last package adopted end of December, we have mobilized 45 billion euros of public revenues, including missed revenues or income and also additional expenditure, direct support to families and companies. These response packages include very powerful measures, such as lowering electricity taxes and the cost of functioning of the electric system, subsidies to public transport, an increase in the minimum living income and non-contributory pensions, a €200 monthly subsidy to lower income households, direct support to gas and electricity intensive industries. I'd say among all these measures, one stands out, and that's the Iberian solution to decouple international gas prices from electricity prices in our wholesale market. I think this clearly stands out because this mechanism has helped electricity prices in Spain and Portugal to be much lower than our peers, other European countries, and this is a key issue, not only to citizens, but also obviously to the competitiveness of Spanish companies. Spain has been calling for a European response. In your introductory remarks, you were talking about the importance of Europe and having a European response to this war, the same way we reacted as Europeans to the shock created by the pandemic. Well, Spain has been calling for a strong and fast, agile European response to the impact of the war, and in particular the impact in energy prices since July 2021. Slowly but surely, all our ideas are pushing through, are coming through, and a lot of them are now guiding the debates at the European level in the energy field. This very week, the government of Spain adopted another submission to the European Union with concrete proposals on how to reform, how to build a new regulatory framework for the energy sector in Europe, which is fit for purpose. Until such time that we have an appropriate regulatory framework, the Iberian solution must be in place so that it ensures that we continue to have a very competitive framework for the Spanish economy, for the Iberian economy in these turbulent times in international energy markets. As long as it is necessary, we will continue to support most affected citizens, most affected companies, but trying to do it in a manner which is efficient in the use of public resources, having targeted responses and trying to ensure consistency with our mid-term green agenda. Public transportation is obviously a win-win from this point of view. It is one of the best measures we have undertaken because it is shifting transportation towards public, more effective, more efficient, more energy efficient means of transportation, maximizing the positive impact of public revenues, public expenditure. The government, just to finish on the general policy, economic policy priorities, and talking about the response to inflation, for the moment, we do not have any indication of second-round effects of inflation in Spain. Nevertheless, from the point of view of the government, we've been supporting and encouraging social partners to agree on a framework for the coming years for the evolution of wages and corporate margins, so that we can have what we call a pacto de rentas, an incomes agreement that would provide confidence to companies, workers, families, and also investors. We will continue, and we continue to work on this together with the social partners, and I would hope that we have such an agreement which would continue the trend of social agreements that have provided a very good framework to have a stable social framework and also effective implementation of all our policies in the past years. Regarding fiscal policy, we're taking advantage of strong growth and extraordinary employment figures to pursue the fiscal consolidation agenda, to lower our deficit and public debt ratios, absorbing as fast as possible the extraordinary increase caused by the response to the pandemic. In 2022, as we did in the previous year, we have met our debt and deficit targets, and we are continuing steadily on a medium-term path towards a deficit and debt ratios which are below 3% and 110% of GDP respectively by 2025. It is worth noting the significant increase in fiscal revenues, 75% of which is due to economic and structural factors, so it is beyond the impact of inflation. Structural factors that have led to an increase in the tax base. Factors such as the dynamism of the labor market that I have already referred to, the fight against tax fraud, and the surfacing, the uncovering of the underground or informal economy that is taking place since the pandemic. Furthermore, thanks to the excellent management of the Treasury, Spain is paying on average less than half for public debt as we did in 2011. We have taken advantage of the period of extraordinarily low interest rates of recent years to refinance our debt and to progressively reduce its cost and extend also the maturity date. The risk premium has remained stable throughout this period of uncertainty. Actually, we had the first auctions of the year this week with very strong demand and stable premia. This very morning we had an auction and the risk premium of a sovereign Spanish debt has gone below 100 basis points. So we are continuing to have a privileged access to financial markets. And this is despite the progressive tightening of the European Central Bank's monetary policy. And I think this is a sign of the confidence of international investors in the Spanish economy and the credibility of our economic policy and the fiscal consolidation path. Finally, as I mentioned before, we have strived to balance what's urgent with what's important. And so we have relentlessly pursued the ambitious agenda of reforms and investments of the recovery plan funded with the Next Generation EU funds. And this plan has already had a very significant impact on growth in 2021, mainly through expectations in 2021, but also in 2022 through investments and reforms that are already here and now having an impact on the ground. Our forecast is that the plan will have a maximum impact between 2023 and 2025, increasing the Spanish GDP by 3 percentage points on average in the period 2021 to 31. We have a lot at stake. The Spanish economy must really profit from this unique opportunity provided by the Next Generation EU funds, and that is why Spain has been the front runner in Europe in the implementation of the Next Generation EU funds. As you all know, we have already received 31 billion euros from the European budget. We are expecting the positive assessment of the 6 billion third payment in February. The investment flow has reached cruising speed with over 2 billion euros mobilized on average every month on a monthly rate in 2022 by the state or by the regions or the town halls, the cities. We have launched 12 strategic projects known as PERTES in strategic areas such as sustainable mobility, industrial decarbonization of industry, renewable energy, green hydrogen, the agri-food industry, shipbuilding, healthcare, microelectronics. The implementation of structural reforms has kept pace with the flow of investment with very important groundbreaking reforms. I also already mentioned labor market, but I think just as important are the reforms having to do with education, vocational training, science, and those reforms to improve the business climate, support and attract investment and talent to Spain. That's the law for business creation and growth, known as Ley Crea y Crece, the reform of the insolvency regime, the new startup law, among others. All these reforms are placing Spain as one of the most advanced and attractive countries from the point of view of the regulatory and legal framework. In addition to the first phase of the plan, where we are mobilizing 70 billion euros of transfers from the EU budget, We have recently adopted the draft addendum to the recovery plan, which we will submit formally in the coming weeks. We are in the midst of the public consultation. And this addendum will mobilize the remaining 7.7 billion euros in grants, in transfers, which we want to devote to reinforcing these PERTEs, these strategic projects, particularly those with an impact on our strategic autonomy. Mr. Flores was referring to the need to reinforce our strategic autonomy right now in the areas of energy, agri-food, industry, technology, and digital, and these are the areas we want to reinforce with the addendum to the plan. We will also mobilize 84 billion euros in loans, and that provides Spain with an invaluable safety net to ensure that the investment continues in the coming years without, of course, immediately increasing Spain's public debt burden, and also demanding or requesting the 2.6 billion euros from the REPowerEU mechanism that will be devoted to the diversification of energy sources, deployment of renewables, and energy efficiency. All in all, these additional resources will I think, complement and reinforce those strategic projects that are proving to be most effective and are swiftly being deployed on the ground. Let me conclude. I would like to conclude sending again a strong message of confidence to both our national and foreign investors, companies, and all those attending the Spain's Investors Day here today. Because we're finding ourselves, and I'm sure that the discussion this morning has gone around this concept, now we're facing many challenges, many uncertainties. The international environment is particularly unstable. But for the moment, the Spanish economy has proven to be resilient. We have been able to face the challenges and the headwinds, and there are a number of strengths, as you were just mentioning. Spain has a number of strengths and tailwinds that will support the pursuance of this strong growth and job creation and the modernization process also in 2023, in particular through the deployment of the next generation EU-funded recovery plan. And that will allow us to continue the strong pace of national and investing and international investment in our country. Let me say this very briefly, a couple of words in Spanish to summarize this idea, ¿no? En otras palabras, el plan de recuperación nos permite explicar la evolución de la economía española en 2021 y en 2022, el crecimiento del Producto Interior Bruto, el empleo, la calidad del empleo creado, la inversión pública y privada. Todos estos factores extraordinarios y el anuncio de proyectos de inversión sin precedentes en nuestro país no se entienden sin el impulso de los fondos europeos Next Generation y también las reformas estructurales que hemos puesto en marcha, que ya están muy avanzadas y que aquí y ahora ya están teniendo un impacto positivo sobre la economía española. La confianza que ofrece este ambicioso plan creo que convierte a España en un destino muy atractivo para los inversores extranjeros, como demuestra el incremento de la inversión extranjera en casi un 55% en los 3 primeros trimestres de 2022 y los numerosos millonarios anuncios de inversiones estratégicas en nuestro país en sectores como el de el cambio climático, la energía, las energías renovables, el vehículo eléctrico o las nuevas tecnologías. Hemos logrado afrontar bien los retos derivados del shock exógeno generado por la pandemia y también estamos afrontando bien los retos derivados de la guerra en Ucrania y ahora se trata de seguir en esa misma línea, continuar con una política económica que es la que estamos llevando a cabo desde hace 4 años y medio, respondiendo a lo urgente sin perder de vista lo importante, centrándonos en 3 ejes: responsabilidad fiscal, justicia social y reformas estructurales progresistas mirando al futuro. From the Spanish government's point of view, we are absolutely determined to continue with an economic policy that reinforces investors' confidence in the Spanish economy, based on fiscal responsibility, social justice, and forward-looking, future-proof structural reforms, and which is reflected in concrete actions we are taking on the ground, concrete results, such as the sound budgetary management, effective measures to respond to the impact of the war, as we did to respond to the pandemic, and the deployment of a very ambitious recovery plan funded with the Next Generation EU funds. In a nutshell, I'd say this is the challenge. Continue on the same path and make the most of this historic opportunity to transform our economy, thinking about the future generations. Let me end here, and I'm very happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. the Vice President. I'm Frédéric Prétet. I'm the Chief Economist of BNP Paribas XIII, so I have the honor to handle this Q&A session. So I just, as a reminder, you have a little paper. So if you can write your question in English, please, and I will submit it, of course. So I will start with the first question. As you mentioned, one of the strengths of the Spanish economy has been its capacity to attract investments, to be competitive. You mentioned the foreign direct investment, which are very strong, the current account surplus still in Spain. That's a big difference with France, for example. But we are in a situation today where the good news is that energy prices are moving down, but unfortunately for corporates, energy prices, gas prices will still be maybe 2-3 times higher than it used to be maybe 2 years ago, very much higher than our competitors in the US, in Asia. At the same time, our friends in the US are also implementing the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's a big challenge for competitivity in Europe and for Spain. So first question will be how you're going to deal with this, how to continue to be competitive, attractive for Spain in this environment. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this question. Actually, I spent yesterday's morning in one of the regions of Spain where there is a very strong industry, I would say the best in the world, in tile making. And of course, they're extremely concerned. This is a gas-intensive industry. And it provides a very good example of the way we approach this issue. We think that we have to provide a short-term response, supporting companies, supporting the sector, trying to cushion the impact of the high gas prices. But at the same time, we need to also have a very clear midterm strategy to decarbonize these energy-intensive industries. And the Next Generation EU funds provide us with an extraordinary opportunity to do so. So the last strategic project we adopted end of December is precisely the decarbonization of the industry project, because we cannot only rely on subsidies and state aid and subsidizing gas prices. This is not a sustainable policy, which is also having an impact, a fiscal impact, which we have to prevent. We have to be as fast as possible and as swift as possible in ensuring the technological transformation of these industries. And we have seen before that when we all put our energy together, the public sector, the private sector, and we make sufficiently large investments in a focused manner, we're able to achieve what looks like impossible at the beginning. Let me refer to the vaccine. You know, when the pandemic broke, everybody said it's going to be 4 or 5 years until we have a vaccine, and we were able to do it in less than a year, thanks to the public and the private sector investing together. If we all put our energy and our focus in trying to do this transition as fast as possible, we will be able, I think, to see many breakthroughs in the technological sector faster than we thought. That's a first comment. My second comment is that in order to address the challenge derived from the IRA, but also the other geopolitical challenges we're facing, we need a coordinated European response. It cannot be chacun pour soi. It cannot be each country just investing public resources in subsidizing its national industry and then engaging in a very destructive competition. Just as a tax, bringing taxes down as fast as possible is a destructive competition which impoverishes all of us because it weakens our public sectors, the same way, we cannot have a race to the top in subsidies. And this is a very real challenge, and that is why the Spanish government has submitted a non-paper to the European Commission precisely calling on an adjustment, a reform of the state aid control process so as to have swift procedures, but to ensure that there is a protection of the internal market in order to focus and maximize the positive impact of the public resources which are now devoted to supporting the European industry. And then a third and final comment on my side. I think the core of the problem is high gas prices. So let's focus on lowering gas prices, right? The Iberian solution is providing a very clear solution to us. And in our view, as soon as possible, we should have a European regulatory framework which is fit for purpose and ensures low energy prices for the whole of the EU. This is the only structural response that can really provide us with strategic autonomy.
Thank you. I will follow, just before asking this question from the audience, I will follow with this on the EU response, because as you mentioned, Spain just submitted a proposal to the EU Commission regarding this reforming of the energy market in Europe. Can you come back a little bit of what the innovation of these Spanish propositions, how we could maybe change and attract, you know, that Germany, Netherlands are relatively reluctant to go into these directions, given your feeling of past ECOFIN meeting, EU Council and things, how you see the situation evolving and how this Spanish proposition could bring the Dutch and the Germans back to a kind of compromise?
Well, I need to be very diplomatic here. But I don't think I'm disclosing any secret when I say that not all countries see eye to eye when it comes to how to ensure that the regulatory framework is fit for purpose right now. That is why we've been calling since July 2021, and we have submitted very different proposals. And I think that that's given Spain a leadership in this debate. Prime Minister Sanchez, President Sanchez has a leading role. Vice President Rivera, I don't know if she has come to the Spain Investors Day, so she's a very qualified voice in these debates, because everything we've been saying since July 2021 has proven to be right, unfortunately. And also the Iberian mechanism, over which some had skepticism at the beginning, has also proven to be the best response, temporary response, but the best response to ensure the decoupling of international gas prices from the wholesale market electricity prices. And that is why, until such time that we have an appropriate regulatory framework for the energy market, we need to extend the Iberian solution. In a nutshell, what we're putting on the table is the proposals that many experts and academic analysis were supporting, which is to have long-term stability, provide European companies with long-term stable prices, and that is obviously a key element also for the competitiveness and planning and well-functioning of our whole industry, whilst at the same time having short-term markets which continue to provide a price indication and a price signal leading to the right decisions. So it is a relatively complex academic building, but which I think is going to be very useful. It has been welcomed positively, I think, by our European partners to kickstart a debate, and so to get the ball rolling, so that as soon as possible the Commission puts a proposal on the table, and as soon as possible we can engage actively and try to review and modernize our regulatory framework.
Thank you. And our first question, how do you keep inflation at low levels while expansionary fiscal policy at the same time?
Well, on how to keep low inflation levels, has the governor of the Bank of Spain participated in this event? So, I mean, it is the responsibility of the European Central Bank to reach its inflation targets. And one should not lose sight of the fact that it is a midterm target, this 2%. I think the key challenge is how to ensure that inflation goes down, as all indicators are pointing towards, and the market is expecting fast in 2023, without creating a downturn of the European economy. In this context, I insist all economic analysis point towards the Spanish economy continuing to grow strongly in 2023 and outperforming our peers. But nevertheless, I think this is the balance that the European Central Bank will need to strike. When it comes to fiscal policy in Spain, we have pursued a very responsible fiscal policy. As I said, targeting our actions, trying to maximize the impact and minimize the public investment to respond to the challenges, first the pandemic, now the war, being determined and acting with very, very ambitious measures. In the case of the pandemic, the 140 billion euros in public guarantees to ensure liquidity and support our companies and our economy. The ERTES, the short-term work schemes, which protected employment and are surely underlying the strong performance of the labor market in Spain. And likewise, now when we are talking about the war, free public transportation. This is a very ambitious measure, together with the other reductions of taxes, which have a large impact on our fiscal balances. But our economic policy and our fiscal policy continues to be based on the principles of prudence and responsibility. So we will be meeting our targets of reduction of the deficit and debt to GDP ratios. And I think that from this point of view, we are ourselves contributing to the moderation of inflation in our country and the continuation of the positive trend that we've lived in 2021 and 2022.
Thank you. On the labor market, as you mentioned, there is a challenge fulfilling talent needs for many new investment globally and, of course, for Spain also. But in the case of Spain, unemployment is still 12%. And it's difficult to understand why we do have these problems. What's your view about the reasons and the actions we need to take?
I thank you very much for this question. We were just talking about it before. Wherever I go, whatever meeting we have, be it with the semiconductor and microelectronic manufacturing ecosystem, which is actually very strong and dynamic in Spain, be it yesterday as I visited the University of Castellón, which is developing very interesting R&D projects funded with the Next Generation EU funds in areas such as materials, energy efficiency, cybersecurity. They are all telling me we're looking for talented persons, we need talented persons. And one of the key objectives of the recovery plan is precisely to support and fund digital skills programs, what we call Generation D programs, conducted by the public and the private sector to upgrade the digital competences of the whole population and also create experts in the different areas. Also, the reskilling and upskilling of workers in the different sectors, the development of programs of vocational training, university programs having to do with the new green and digital economy. And we, together with the reinforcement of the strategic projects, with the addendum to the recovery plan, we will fund 2 new programs. One has to do with micro or short-term training programs to have credits, so that we can very fast have this recycling, upskilling, reskilling of the skills of workers, and so that we can facilitate that persons who come out of the vocational training programs or the universities, that they have the necessary skills to respond to these demands and these needs. And then the second program, which I think is also of interest to companies and investors, has to do with technical assistance to the regions, to the cities, local authorities, to all those that are managing the European funds, the Next Generation EU funds, so that we can also try to speed up procedures and remove bottlenecks, bureaucratic bottlenecks, which may be slowing down some of the investments.
Thank you. In order to keep it with the schedule...
Let me just, because I didn't know the word, but what I was talking about, let me say it in Spanish very briefly. Con la adenda al plan de recuperación queremos financiar 2 programas horizontales justamente para asegurar que se pueden eliminar cualquier cuello de botella en la ejecución del plan. Uno, para prestar asistencia técnica a las autoridades locales, muy especialmente a las que hemos reforzado también para toda la gestión económica y financiera, y otro de microacreditaciones, que estamos trabajando con el ministro de Universidades, para poder proporcionar la cualificación necesaria a los trabajadores y a los estudiantes para poder acceder a los empleos que se están creando con las inversiones del plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a final question, and there is a French bias in this question. So in 1 week time exactly, on next Thursday, it is the first day of big strike in France. So don't come in France next Thursday because of the pension reform. But it's the day also of Mr. Macron and most of his government who will therefore escape the strike and come to Spain in order to sign a new treaty. So beyond the friendship between Spain and France, what as a corporate in terms of sectors, what means this treaty in terms of strengthening cooperations, which sectors, what, if you can give us a little bit of the flavors of this strengthening cooperation.
Well, I don't think they're coming to Spain because they're escaping the strike. I wouldn't like to leave this idea floating around. This is a long-term, long-standing bilateral summit, which we hold regularly, which is also complementing many other summits which are organized by the business associations of France or Spain, for example, and which take place. The most recent one took place in Paris. Last year it was Madrid. So there is, I think, a very close cooperation and coordination between our 2 countries, which is affecting our political governments, but it also affecting our economies and our companies, and obviously our populations. We are very close to each other, and the needs of Spain and France and the views of Spain and France are most of the times aligned. Not always, but most of the time. So there is an ample area where we can deepen our cooperation. And I think that right now it is essential that we deepen our cooperation and that we try to provide some responses to some of the challenges that Europe is facing, and most notably in the area of industrialization and strategic autonomy. We have every interest in working together to try to shape the European response to the challenges that we've been discussing for the past minutes.
Thank you very much. So I will close the session and the Q&A session. So thank you very much for your clear answers, and I hope that give even more visibility and strength to the willingness to invest in Spain. Thank you.